Flying Scotsman, the most famous steam locomotive in the world, the first to run non-stop between London and Edinburgh, as well as having traveled the longest non-stop distance for a steam locomotive, and a part of one of the biggest debates in railway history. And today, on February 24th, 2023, the locomotive is now 100 years old. To celebrate, I will be covering his Rolling Thomas and Friends. I'm SodaFan15, and this is the history, character, and appearances of Flying Scotsman. Now, before we get started, we need to understand certain things about the history of the real engine. You can find plenty of documentaries on the subject online, and I recommend you check them out. There will be a link to Terrier 55 Stepney's video on the history of the Flying Scotsman in the top right corner. But here's a brief recap. On February 24th, 1923, 4472 emerged from the LNER Doncaster Works. It was named after the flagship express of said railway. For 25 years, the engine pulled this train and set the record for the first steam locomotive to officially run 100 miles per hour. I know many people claim City of Truro was the first to do so, but we won't be talking about that here. In 1948, the LNER was nationalised along with the other three main railways of Britain to create British Railways. Being a pre-grouping locomotive and not the fastest anymore, the engine was just seen as another member of the fleet. British Railways, who was keen on replacing steam with diesels, published the preserved locomotives list. Somehow, the Flying Scotsman didn't make it on and was announced for scrapping at the end of its career.
Luckily, no one was hurt.
The engine was saved by Alan Pegler and restored to its LNER condition. After a few years, he brought the locomotive to the USA on a big tour, while also promoting British companies. Halfway through, however, the British Prime Minister changed, and the government's financial backing was withdrawn. Nevertheless, Pegler continued with the tour, and eventually went bankrupt in San Francisco. The locomotive was saved a second time by William McAlpine, and the locomotive was brought back to the UK. If you want more information on the tour, The Unlucky Tug made a full video on the subject, and I will have a link to it in the top right corner in the description. For a few years, the Flying Scotsman pulled rail tours around the UK, until 1988, when it went on tour in Australia. While there, the locomotive broke another record, when it traveled 422 miles non-stop. It then returned to Britain, and continued to run until William McAlpine ran into financial problems, and sold the locomotive to Tony Martington. After a few years of restoration and rail tours, he too had money issues, and he sold the locomotive to the National Railway Museum. Ever since then, it has been running rail tours. Now that we have that out of the way, we can get into how they depicted Flying Scotsman in Thomas and Friends. His first appearance was in the 23rd book of the Railway series, Enterprising Engines. Along with his appearance in the book, it contains some of the best stories, and is my personal favorite in the series.
But that's another story.
In the first story, Gordon feels depressed after hearing about the fate of his brothers on the mainland. When the Fat Controller confirms what the Diesels say, Gordon becomes even more miserable.
Yes, Gordon, it is true. What, sir? All my Doncaster brothers drawn the same time as me? All gone, except one.
Seeing how mortified Gordon is, he arranges with Flying Scotsman's then owner, Alan Pegler, for him to come to Sodor and cheer Gordon up. When he arrives, the two are overjoyed to see one another again, explaining to each other about their rebuilds and Scotsman's second tender.
You've changed a lot, smiled Flying Scotsman. I had a rebuild at Crewe. They didn't do a proper Doncaster job, of course, but it serves. I had a rebuild too and looked hideous, but my owner said I was an extra special engine and made them give me back my proper shape. Is that why you have two tenders, being special? No.
In real life, British Railways, who were replacing steam with modern diesel, had no need for the old coal bunkers and water towers, and were having them removed. To solve this problem, Pegler built a new second tender for the sole purpose of carrying water. Because Scotsman had both tenders when he first came to Sodor, he is almost always seen with both of them for the rest of the series. I also really like how Scotsman says he looked hideous in British Railway's condition. I personally don't think it looks terrible, but he always looks best in his LNER condition. After Duck pulls a trick on Henry, he becomes a laughingstock to the other engines. I want to point out that even though Scotsman does laugh at Henry, he also cheers for him in the next story when he rescues two diesels on trial. The next day he returns to the mainland.
The Fat Controller said he had all been honoured, and thanked Flying Scotsman and his owner for their help. And Flying Scotsman departed to the strains of Will Ye No Come Back Again, led, as one might expect, by Donald and Douglas.
Unfortunately, Flying Scotsman barely appears in the classic series. All we ever see of him is his tender speaking out from behind a shed. This is because the crew were on a tight budget and couldn't afford to build certain one-off characters. They were able to build some engines, like Diesel, because they brought him back as an antagonist in other episodes. With him only being able to build his tenders, it results in most of the story being rewritten. Gordon doesn't recognize his brother, and the Fat Controller comforts him just by telling him that steam will never be replaced on Sodor.
Don't worry, Gordon, that will never happen on my railway. Gordon felt better.
However, Scotsman did appear later on in the TV series, with his debut in The Great Race. As soon as Scotsman is introduced, they set up a sibling rivalry with Gordon. A nice touch, and something we never really saw before. When these two interacted in the Railway series, Gordon was just relieved to have one of his classmates still around, and Scotsman was admiring how well Gordon and some of the rest of the engines were treated on the Northwestern. Now that some time has passed, we see that they have a brotherly competition. One of my favorite characteristics that they gave Scotsman was him being aware of his fame, but it hasn't gone to his smoke box.
This is my brother. They call him the Flying Scotsman.
Indeed they do. It almost makes me sound famous, doesn't it?
When they meet at the Great Railway Show, Gordon brags about his new streamlining, but Scotsman just laughs at him.
I'm called the Shooting Star now.
Don't be ridiculous.
During the race, Gordon actually passes Scotsman, but is forced to stop and lose the race when his pressure gets too high, and he fails. For just a second, Scotsman slows down next to Gordon to check on him and see if he's alright. After the race, Gordon feels sorry for himself, and Scotsman comes to talk to him and compliments him on his attempt.
I've had quite enough of this streamlining lark.
Shame about the race, little brother. But you know, you engines from Sodor are made of sterner stuff than I'd thought.
Why do you always have to call me little brother?
I think they added this little brother thing as a part of their brotherly teasing. After this, Scotsman does make occasional appearances in the show. In Big World Big Adventures, he gets mad when Ace goes on the tracks and nearly causes an accident. He also teases Gordon about the fish trucks at the end of his train. In some shots, we see him traveling beyond Vicarstown, implying that he comes back to Sodor every once in a while. Hi guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If anyone is wondering, yes, I am aware of Flying Scotsman's presence in All Engines Go. I just didn't want to hurt anyone's eyes and ears. I would like to say that this is the first time I've done this sort of video, so my apologies if I did something wrong. I've never used a microphone before, so this will take some getting used to. Hopefully, I can use this experience in future videos. If you want to see me do more videos like this, leave a comment down below. I want to talk about someone who has a small role in the show, but also appears pretty often. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to the Unlucky Tug for inspiring me to do these sorts of videos. I will, however, make sure to not cover the characters he has already covered, unless we are both working on the same character at the same time. This video took me a long time to make, so I can't promise these analyses very often. Anyways, that does it for me. I'm Sort of Fan 15, and this has been the Flying Scotsman Analyzed.